Taiwan will defend its sovereignty. That's the message from President Tsai Ing-wen as China lays out its plan to take the country. And while Beijing says its military drills have ended, patrols will continue. Is this the new normal? Also ahead, how China is using sand as a weapon against Taiwan. And the end of an era, Taiwan moves one step closer to phasing out nuclear power. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Betty Chen. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen says the country will not back down from defending its sovereignty. Her comments follow the release of China's white paper on Taiwan, the first since Xi Jinping took power. The report lays out how Beijing intends to take Taiwan, using force if necessary. Bing Wang reports.
Just after China's military ended unprecedented drills, Beijing released its first white paper on Taiwan since Xi Jinping came into power. The report, titled The Taiwan Question and China's Reunification in a New Era, reiterates Beijing's aspirations to claim Taiwan using force if necessary. In it, China also blamed Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or the DPP, of deepening tensions between them. Beijing sees the DPP as leaning towards independence. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen slammed the document.
台湾人民希望的是我们要和平，我们不挑衅，我们不升高冲突，但捍卫主权跟国家安全，台湾绝对不退缩。
A week before the white paper's release, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, the highest-level U.S. official to do so in 25 years. This was seen as U.S. support for Taiwan. In response, Beijing conducted live-fire drills around the country. Analysts say the white paper that followed is more hostile than the previous documents released by Beijing.
3年的那个白皮书，那时候其实两岸氛围算是很好的，所以它的这个语气啊，相较的都是还算是缓和。到2000年呢，那时候因为阿扁刚当选总统，而且经历了所谓的996台飞弹危机的这个事情，那它相较之下语气的话在强调多。我们只要在比较这个新的这个白皮书的话，这个杀伐之气很重啊。
China is now putting more pressure on Taiwan, both rhetorically and militarily, raising fears of an imminent Chinese invasion. But there's little anxiety on the streets of Taiwan. Most people here stand with their president, and like her, they won't be cowed by Beijing, ready to do what they can to defend Taiwan's sovereignty. Patrick Chen and Bing Wang for TaiwanPlus.
For more on what the white paper tells us about China's plans for Taiwan, our reporter Reinhold Kilpatrick spoke with Lev Nachman, a political scientist at Taiwan's National Zhengzhi University.
What parts of the language of this white paper stood out to you?
To me, perhaps the most striking thing was the way that they talked about one country, two systems in a Taiwanese context. This was maybe the most detailed outline of what one country, two systems for Taiwan would look like from the PRC, in kind of the most detailed language that we've seen from them before.
Especially after everything that's happened in Hong Kong over the past few years, how much credibility does the idea of one country, two systems have in Taiwan, according to the latest available survey data?
I think we've seen even beginning in 2020, how many political parties and politicians denounced one country, two systems because of the ongoing Hong Kong protests. And that kind of sentiment shows up in public opinion data. As of 2021, close to 90% of Taiwanese expressed negative feelings towards one country, two systems. And given the last week of military drills, I can't imagine that number is any lower. For the international audience, I think this is about trying to legitimize this claim to Taiwan. I think, there's something to be said about drawing the PRC trying to draw these ties to Hong Kong by saying, look, this is what we did with Hong Kong, and the world was very okay with it after the handover, and we're just trying to repeat that same plan here with Taiwan.
In the Hong Kong context, we talk about one country, two systems pre-2019 and one country, two systems post-2019. In the immediate years after the handover, they were fairly hands-off. And there was still a lot of faith in the future of one country, two systems. But do you think this white paper is explicitly saying, the kind of one country, two systems that would be proffered to Taiwan will very much be the present day Hong Kong, one country, two systems, and not the early pre-handover version?
Very much so. I think this white paper is a much more drastic buildup and drastic framework for what one country, two systems in Taiwan would look like. I don't think there would be that kind of peaceful few years post-implementation that we saw in Hong Kong. Even though they're trying to outline this as a similar approach to Hong Kong, they even mention in the white paper, they acknowledge the Hong Kong protests and say that they've taken measures to make one country, two systems different in response to the Hong Kong protests. So, whatever version of this we're getting is going to be likely a more repressive version, and one that takes Taiwanese autonomy and Taiwanese sovereignty even less into consideration. The idea of giving Taiwanese people some amount of limited sovereignty in the way we saw in Hong Kong seems very unlikely in whatever new scheme that they're designing.
China says its large-scale military exercises around Taiwan have ended, but says it will continue regular patrols. It's a clear sign that Beijing intends to keep the pressure on Taiwan. China launched the drills in response to a visit to Taipei by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She says China is trying to establish a new normal in squeezing Taiwan's strategic space. Louise Watt reports.
Over for now. A week after China began unprecedented large-scale military exercises around Taiwan, it announced the sea and air drills had ended. But Chinese media suggests the country has no intention of letting up its pressure on Taiwan, which China claims as its own and vows to one day control.
战区部队将紧盯台海形势变化，持续开展练兵备战，常态组织台海方向战备警巡，坚决捍卫国家主权和领土完整。
China's exercises in 6 areas around Taiwan came in the wake of the visit to Taipei of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the highest-level U.S. official to step foot in Taiwan in 25 years. Pelosi condemned China's show of force.
What we saw with China was they were trying to establish sort of a new normal, and we just can't let that happen.
In response to China's drills, Taiwan's military released this video of its forces carrying out anti-invasion exercises. It shows Chinese warships at close quarters in the Taiwan Strait. Taiwanese officials say China has used Pelosi's visit as an excuse to prepare for an invasion. And they're hoping for more weapons. Pelosi's delegation says arms sales were discussed, and they're taking steps to process weapons deals more quickly. Countries including the US and Britain have spoken out against what they call Beijing's increasingly aggressive behaviour in recent months. But it doesn't seem like their words will be much of an impediment to China carrying out such exercises again. Chris Ma and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's Coast Guard on the outlying islands of Jinmen is dealing with an increasing number of incursions into its waters by Chinese sand dredgers. Authorities say China is using the stolen sand to reclaim land across the water in the nearby city of Xiamen. Rick Glauert reports.
Sand, an unlikely weapon in China's tool chest of tactics to intimidate Taiwan. Here in Jinmen, which lies just kilometers off the Chinese coast, authorities say China is taking sand from its waters and using it to reclaim land, effectively reducing the distance between Taiwan and China by 4 kilometers. The Taiwanese Coast Guard have been playing a game of cat and mouse with the intruders.
对于越界或非法采砂的船舶，一直采取严厉的执法以及重惩重罚的手段。
In the last few years, thousands of Chinese dredgers have been found illegally mining sand from the seabed of Taiwan's outlying islands.
只是这些海沙船游走在这个两岸这个中线的这个灰色地带那可能我们海岸巡弟兄如果前往驱离的时候，他们会退到这个比较属于大陆一侧的这个海岸中线的以外。
Straining Taiwan's resources, like making the Coast Guard chase these vessels, is all part of China's grey zone warfare tactics. They also include cyber attacks on government agencies, disinformation campaigns, and sending military planes and vessels into the area around Taiwan. The threat posed by China is increasing by the day, and these dredgers off the coast of Jinmen are a constant reminder of just how close the enemy is. Patrick Chen and Rick Glauert for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's average salary increase for the first half of this year has been blunted by the rising cost of living. The government says monthly pay rose by 3% compared with the same period last year. The average monthly salary of just over $1,400 is an all-time high, but it's not keeping up with inflation. Taiwan's consumer price index also jumped by more than 3% for the last 5 months, which means the average salary has seen a decrease of 0.1% in real terms. Latest figures also show that the total number of people in employment was up by 1,000 in June compared to the month before. Taiwan is increasing pay for migrant workers and domestic helpers, their first raise in 7 years.
从国外经过他的契约验证，新的契约验证之后，那他能够依照这个2万块的薪资的一个标准，能够来雇用。
The amount is about $100 more than before, but is still below the minimum pay for Taiwan citizens and migrant factory workers. The raise will benefit about 200,000 caretakers across the country and is meant to help encourage them to stay in Taiwan amid a labor shortage. The government will also offer subsidies to families employing these workers to help cover their increased costs. Taiwan's top semiconductor company has hit a record sales high in July with a jump of 6% from the previous month. TSMC says the numbers are just about 50% higher than compared to the same period last year. The world's largest contract chip maker announced sales of $6.2 billion in July, the highest ever in a single month. But the picture is not all that rosy. TSMC is facing declining demand for chips used in consumer electronics. The appetite for its industry-leading advanced chips remains strong, though, helping push up profit margins. Taiwan is set to shut down its nuclear facility on the North Coast next year. Called the second nuclear power plant, it's one of the 2 still operating in the country. It's a step towards the government's goal of phasing out nuclear power. But as John Van Trieste reports, it will also increase Taiwan's reliance on imported energy.
Sitting near the shores of the northern city of Keelung, the facility known as the second nuclear plant has been feeding the grid since 1981. But in March, the operating license of its last reactor runs out. And that will be the end of the road for the plant, which has been running for more than 4 decades. The government has approved a 25-year proposal to decommission the site. But during the meeting to finalize the plans, environmentalists and Taiwan's state-run power company were at odds over where to store spent fuel rods. Spent fuel rods can contain toxic substances and nuclear waste that is highly radioactive.
会优先的来办理，尤其是室内干除，室外干除的部分。 我们还是希望能够积极的争取新北市政府的支持。
Disagreements like this around nuclear power have been brewing for years. But Taiwan imports around 98% of its total energy, including oil and natural gas. And right now, nuclear power provides 11% of its electricity needs. The government's goal is to phase out nuclear power by 2025. It seems to have support. At the end of last year, in a referendum, voters rejected a proposal to resume work on a new plant that had been shelved due to opposition. The second nuclear plant's shutdown next year will leave just 1 functioning facility. And with a looming global energy crisis that's likely to impact Taiwan, the nuclear issue is one that promises to remain contentious. Klein Wang and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan says more than 6,000 kilograms of dried lotus seeds imported from China contained unacceptable levels of toxins. The seeds, which are used in traditional Chinese medicine and cooking, were found to have nearly 10 times the allowed level of aflatoxins, which are produced by mold and fungi. Taiwan's Food and Drug Administration says the contaminated products will be destroyed or returned. Spot inspections will also be stepped up.
那黄体毒素它本身算是一个致癌物，就说如果我们长期吃到黄体毒素的话，它影响肝脏功能，也会引起肝癌的风险。
Coming up here on TaiwanPlus, 1,000 paper cranes, all of them folded by people in Taiwan. We check out the latest creation from Japanese artist Asao Toklo.
Good local time, everyone. Welcome to Innovative Minds with Audrey Tong.
I would say one thing that I think the biggest difference is, do we see cuisine or culinary as a culture or as tourism? It should be under culture. Every Taiwanese should learn Taiwan flavor history. For example, when I was in Singapore, I represent Singapore to Paris to cook in the embassy of Singapore for all the ambassadors coming from around the world to show Singapore cuisine, which doesn't make any sense. I'm Taiwanese. Culinary is the best tool for us to show who we are, our identity.
Hey everyone, I'm Andre Chang. I'll see you on TaiwanPlus.
I'm Audrey Tong. See you on TaiwanPlus.
For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please make sure to download the TaiwanPlus app.
Bubble tea has become such a big hit in the US that when the bubble tea crisis happened back in 2021, the country was hit hard. Did you know that these chewy tapioca bowls are actually from Taiwan? That's right, it's also where the first bubble tea was born. We started to realize that there's a host of toppings we could add to our teas. If you have ever been to a bubble tea shop, you might have heard something like 无糖少冰去冰半糖. But what does that mean exactly?
I'm Rick Lout for TaiwanPlus. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, download the TaiwanPlus app.
Welcome back. You're watching Taiwan Plus News. Taiwan reported around 22,000 new local COVID cases on Thursday. As domestic infection numbers gradually go down, the country is easing rules for incoming foreign arrivals. Starting next week, overseas passengers will no longer be required to present a negative PCR test taken 2 days before boarding. They will still need to stay in quarantine for 3 days after arriving in Taiwan and then monitor their condition for another 4 days. And anyone who catches COVID while abroad won't be allowed to fly to Taiwan within a week of a positive test. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has reshuffled his cabinet as public anger mounts over the ruling Liberal Democratic Party's ties to a controversial religious movement. The reshuffle comes after the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe last month put a spotlight on the government's ties with the Unification Church, a semi-Christian group founded in South Korea that has been branded as a cult. The man who targeted Abe blamed the church for driving his family to financial ruin. Subsequent revelations have exposed several politicians as having long-standing ties with the church. Kishida has sought to distance himself from the scandal.
旧統一教会に関連する問題について申し上げます。まず私個人は知り得る限り当該団体とは関係がないということを申し上げます。
A beluga whale that had been trapped in France's Seine River for a week has died. Rescuers tried to save the whale using a crane to lift it into a refrigerated truck so it could be returned to the ocean. But the beluga developed breathing complications during the 160-kilometer journey, and veterinarians had to euthanize it. Belugas normally live in Arctic waters, and the trapped whale could not have survived in a warm, freshwater Seine. A conservation project in Cuba has defied global trends by boosting the local population of sea turtles. But climate change is putting the island's success story at risk. Stosh Butler reports.
A green sea turtle clambers ashore to lay a clutch of eggs. And here, on Cuba's Guanahaca-Bibes Peninsula, is one of the best places for her to do it. The area's conservation project has been a startling success.
Gracias al proyecto y gracias a las tareas que se realizan en el parque y gracias al voluntariado, las poblaciones de tortugas marinas en Guanacavives tienden al aumento. Es decir, cada vez hay más anidación, cada vez tenemos más hembras anidando en las playas y eso, por supuesto, que es una excelente noticia.
The peninsula, at the very western end of Cuba, lies at the crossroads of the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, perfect for sea turtles surfing the ocean currents.
La corriente del Golfo pasa muy cerca de Guanacavives, entonces eso hace que sea un área de gran actividad migratoria y de hecho eso ha convertido a Guanacavives en un área muy interesante desde el punto de vista genético, porque tiene una variabilidad que no tiene prácticamente ninguna otra área de anidación en el Atlántico.
But it's not all good news for these endangered reptiles. Climate change is causing more and more vicious hurricanes. They're wreaking havoc with turtles' nesting grounds. Sargassum seaweed is piling up on beaches and blocking baby turtles' path back to the sea. And the hotter climate is changing fertility patterns. Baby sea turtle sex is determined by the nest temperature. Warmer nests means more females. Normally, green sea turtles would find somewhere else to lay their eggs. But beachside development in Florida, Mexico and the Caribbean means there are fewer options nearby. Despite those problems, Guanahaca-Bibes is suffering less damage than other nearby locations. The peninsula's steep beaches are less vulnerable to a rising sea level, and its trees offer shade from the hot sun. Experts say that makes Guanahaca-Bibes a natural laboratory to see how the reptiles adapt to a changing climate. If green sea turtles can keep thriving on this Cuban peninsula, there's hope for the species' survival. Alex Chen and Stash Butler for TaiwanPlus.
The Japanese designer who created a logo for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics is now showcasing his latest piece in Taiwan, 1,000 paper cranes. Sandy Chi takes a closer look.
A sea of birds dangling from the ceiling. This work of art was designed by Asao Tokolo. He's known for creating the symbol of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. This is Tokolo's first solo exhibition in Taiwan, featuring around 300 of his works, including his latest piece, Tokolo Orizuru, or Tokolo's Paper Cranes. It's made up of 1,000 origami birds folded by Taiwanese nationals to convey blessings to the world. According to a Japanese legend, anyone who folds 1,000 paper cranes is granted a wish.
まず一つはこれだけの数をまだ日本でやったことがありません。ですごくこんな数ができるとも思ってなかったですし、逆に台湾でこれができたってことを日本のじゃあ日本でどうしようとか、また別の展覧会の時にどうしようかっていう意味では。良い意味ですごくハードルが上がったなと思ってます。
Tokolo's creations may look like traditional paper cranes, but they're actually a new take on an old classic. And the design is much more difficult than it looks, requiring continual adjustment. But Tokolo says it was worth it. He's made innovations that will pave the way for future designs. He's also inviting visitors to fold their own paper cranes so they can feel more connected to the theme.
I think it's very interesting because it's not just letting us to see the expedition or see his artwork. It's also letting us to be included as a part of the expedition, and so that we could participate in and feel and even fold the patterns themselves. It feels kind of like a meditation to the art piece and the artist itself.
For Asao Tokolo, the hope is that these paper cranes can help heal the world.
大きな断絶を見るときに言葉ができる人っていうのは言葉で コメントをしたりとか訴えたりとかすると思うんだけど、僕はできないので、何かこうつなげるっていうことを諦めたくないって時に、僕は図形でつなげるということを始めました。
For now, Tokolo is connecting with the people of Taiwan, one paper crane at a time. Aznaya Zhou and Zani Chi for TaiwanPlus.
A special art exhibition is on display in Taipei. These pieces were all created by artificial intelligence, including one based off NASA research data. The brainchild of a Turkish group called Ouch, 3 pieces were created specifically for the Taiwan show, incorporating local music and ocean views. The exhibition runs through mid-September in the capital's Huashan 1914 Creative Park. Thanks for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Betty Chen. Finally, we leave you with images of the world's International Indigenous Day celebration in Mexico. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the TaiwanPlus app. Stay safe and see you next time.